Montana Territory, December 1882. The cold hit like a fist that never let go. Snow covered everything for miles, thick as wool and just as silent. The mountains loomed, the trees groaned under frost, and the wind howled like it carried ghosts. Inside a small log cabin nestled in the Bitterroot Range, 29-year-old Zachary Whitlow stared into a cold hearth, the fire long gone. His bride, Eloise, had died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took her fast. One day she was coughing, next she was burning with fever, and by the 4th morning, Zach had buried her behind the cabin, beneath a pine she used to sit under. He marked the grave with a simple cedar cross. That was all he could do. The snow came the day after, and then the silence. Zach stopped talking, stopped eating much. He moved like someone underwater. He fed the 2 horses because they relied on him, but he let the chickens freeze. The firewood ran low. He did not care. He had not seen another soul in 16 days, until a knock came. It was late morning, the wind screaming outside. For a second he thought he imagined it. Then it came again, sharp and sure. Zach stood slowly, picked up the rifle from beside the door and eased it open. A woman stood there in a long wool coat, the hem crusted in snow. She had a canvas pack on her back and a rifle slung over one shoulder. Her cheeks were red from cold, but her eyes were alert, green, steady. "I saw smoke," she said. "You are the only place for miles. I need shelter." Zach stared. She looked about his age, maybe a little younger. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back in a simple braid. Her voice was flat but not unkind. She did not flinch at the rifle. He stepped back silently and let her in. Inside, she stamped the snow off her boots and slipped her pack off with a grunt. "Name's Bryony Garland," she said, unbuttoning her coat. "Been walking since sunup. My wagon broke through the ice crossing the creek yesterday. Lost my mule. I followed the smoke trail." Zach said nothing. He just stared at her, the rifle still in his hand. She glanced at it, then at him. "You going to shoot me for surviving? Or you going to put that thing down and let me warm up?" He blinked. Slowly, silently, he lowered the rifle and leaned it back against the wall. Bryony moved to the hearth, crouched, and inspected the ashes. "You need a fire," she said. "You got more wood?" He nodded toward the corner. "I will start it," she said, getting to work. Her hands moved quick and competent. She used kindling from her pack, struck a match, and had the fire going in minutes. Zach sat back down on the chair, watching her like someone watching a dream. Bryony didn't speak for a while. She warmed her hands, then took off her gloves and set them by the flame. "I was headed west," she said. "Got a parcel of land near Missoula. Claimed it 2 months ago. Been building. I went east to trade for seed and tools. Took longer than I thought." Zach finally spoke. His voice cracked from disuse. "Why alone?" She looked at him. "Why not?" He did not answer that. Later she cooked. From her pack she pulled cornmeal and dried beans. She found a cast iron pot and used melted snow to boil them. She moved around the kitchen like she belonged there, like she had lived 100 winters. "You live here alone?" she asked as the beans cooked. Zach stared into the flames. "My wife died." She paused. Quiet filled the cabin again, broken only by the pop of the fire. "I am sorry," she said. Zach nodded once. They ate in silence. The food warmed him more than anything had in days. He felt his chest ache, not from grief this time, but from something else. Something pulling him toward the woman across the table. She had strong hands and steady eyes. She did not try to comfort him with empty words. She just existed beside him like she belonged to the same world of hurt and survival. "I will leave in the morning," she said, standing to clean the pot. "There is nowhere to go," Zach said. "Snow's too deep. I can walk. You will freeze." She looked at him. Then I guess I stay a few days. He nodded. Bryony slept in the loft. Zach slept downstairs. He lay awake a long time, listening to the wind, and for the first time in weeks, he did not feel entirely alone. The next day she helped him chop wood. She was strong, her swing clean. She worked beside him without complaint. When her knuckles cracked from the cold, she wrapped them and kept going. Zach watched her from a distance. That night, he built the fire before she came in from feeding the horses. She smiled faintly when she saw it. 2 more days passed. Every hour she stayed, the house felt less like a tomb and more like something alive. She filled the space with movement, with quiet kindness. She repaired a ripped saddlebag. She cleaned the rifle. She made coffee from roasted acorns when the beans ran out. On the 5th day, the weather turned worse. Wind and sleet hammered the cabin. Bryony looked out the window and shook her head. "You are stuck here," Zach said. "Seems I am," Bryony said, and her voice held something warm now. That night they sat close by the fire. The heat from the flames was not the only warmth between them. Bryony looked at him. "You still love her?" Zach nodded slowly. "That will not stop." "I do not want it to," she said. "I just needed to know." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman taking up space in his grief but someone who had known her own kind of loss. Someone who had chosen to live anyway. She was not here to replace anything. She was here to build something new. He reached out and took her hand. She let him, and for the first time since winter began, Zachary Whitlow felt something break open in his chest, and it was light. By the 7th day, the storm had packed snow against the cabin walls so deep it reached the bottom of the windows. The sky hung low and colorless, and the trees stood still under the weight of it all. Zachary rose before dawn. The cold bit sharper now, the kind that got into the joints and stayed. He built up the fire, careful not to wake Bryony, then stepped outside to clear the snow off the porch roof before it bowed. His breath came out in a thick cloud. The axe handle was slick with frost. He didn't hear her come out until she was at his side, pulling her coat tighter. "You should have let me do that," she said. "You were sleeping." "I don't sleep deep in strange places." "You've been here a week." Bryony took the axe from him without asking. "Still strange," she said, and set to work breaking the ice crust along the roof edge. She didn't talk much after that, and Zach didn't press her. The rhythm of the work was its own language. Later, they sat at the table with a shallow bowl of boiled turnips and parsnips between them. Supplies were thin now. The cabin hadn't been provisioned for 2. Bryony watched him pour water from the kettle. "You plan to stay here come spring?" Zach nodded. "This land's paid for. I built it with my own hands." He looked at her. "And I don't know where else I'd go." She traced the rim of her teacup with her thumb. "Seems like a place that could hold something good. If you let it." He didn't answer right away. The light through the window caught her braid where it hung over her shoulder. "You said you claimed land near Missoula." "I did." "You going back to it?" "I will." "When?" She met his eyes. "When the thaw comes." He nodded, then stood and reached for his coat. "Barn roof needs checking." "I'll come." They crossed the yard in silence, boots crunching over packed snow. Inside the barn, the horses stamped and snorted, their breath rising in white plumes. Zach climbed the ladder to the loft and checked the rafters for sag. Bryony stayed below, brushing one of the geldings with firm, practiced strokes. "You know horses?" he called down. "My father was a drover. I helped him drive a herd up from Texas when I was 16. Zach crouched, peering at a beam near the western wall. "That's a long haul." "He died 2 years later. Snakebite." He paused, then climbed back down. "I'm sorry." Bryony looked at him, her hand still on the horse's shoulder. Don't be. He was a hard man, but he taught me how to live without needing much. They left the barn just as snow began to fall again, finer this time, like sifted flour. That night, Zach set out the last of the salt pork and carved it thin to stretch. Bryony stirred cornmeal into a thick mush and added dried sage from her pack. When they sat down, she asked, "You ever think about leaving this place behind?" He considered. "Used to. After she passed, I nearly did. But then I thought I built this to be a home. I'd rather stay and fill it with something again, even if I don't know what yet." "That's honest," she said, and her voice carried a softness it hadn't before. After supper, she pulled out a folded piece of cloth from her bag. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a bundle of dried lavender stems. "My mother grew it," she said. "I kept some when I left Missouri." Zach leaned closer. The smell rose warm and clean, a memory of sun. "I'll hang it in the corner," she said. "Might help the air." He watched her tie it near the window with a strip of twine. The scent drifted into the room, subtle and alive. Before they turned in for the night, he hesitated. "You could sleep down here if you want. Warmer by the hearth." Bryony's eyes lingered on his. "I like the loft," she said. "Close enough I can hear the fire. Far enough I can miss the past." He nodded. She climbed the ladder and didn't look back. When Zach lay down, he stared at the ceiling long after the flames died low. The lavender hung above the window, swaying gently in the draft. He didn't know what came next, but he knew the cabin no longer felt like something left behind. Felt like something beginning. The snow eased by morning, leaving the sky a pale stretch of pearl. Light filtered through the frost-laced window panes, soft enough to make the rough-hewn walls seem gentler. Bryony descended the ladder with her coat already on. She had a way of moving that didn't disturb the quiet. Zach was hunched by the hearth, coaxing the fire back from embers. He didn't turn when she stepped beside him. "I saw tracks near the shed," she said. "Coyote, maybe two. They came close." He tugged the poker free and leaned it against the stones. "Chickens are gone. Nothing left to draw them now." She crouched, stretching her hands toward the heat. "Still, I'll keep watch if you plan to be out a while." Zach stood and reached for the saddle blanket draped over the chair. "Need to check the trap line. Could be something caught." Bryony didn't ask to come. She rose and moved to the table, unwrapping a strip of cloth to reveal half a heel of sour bread. She tore a piece free and handed it to him. "Eat it while you walk," she said. "It won't keep much longer." He took it with a nod, then paused near the door. "If I'm not back by dusk, I'll wait till nightfall," she said. "Then come after you." That tugged something loose in his chest. The woods were hushed beneath the snow, the air still enough that every breath sounded loud. Zach moved slow, careful not to sink too deep. The traps, set along a narrow ridge near the creek bend, yielded a rabbit, half frozen and stiff. He reset the snare, then walked the edge of the ravine, eyes scanning for fresh prints. He didn't expect to find the deer. It lay with one hind leg caught in a thicket of downed pine, its eyes wild but body too weak to rise. A young buck. The snow around it was stamped and torn. Zach stood a moment, watching its sides rise and fall too quick. He drew his knife and knelt. When he returned to the cabin, dusk had already begun to blue the snow. Bryony was outside, sleeves rolled to her elbows, splitting kindling with a hatchet. Her cheeks were ruddy from cold, and her braid had come half undone. Zach tied the deer carcass to the post and stepped close. It was tangled, couldn't get free, would have starved. She set the hatchet down. "You carried it all that way yourself?" He shrugged. "Didn't seem right to let it rot." They dressed it in silence. Bryony's hands didn't falter, though the cold bit hard enough to numb. When they finished, She rinsed the blood from her fingers with melted snow and stood watching the sky. A few stars had come out. "You ever wonder if folks are meant to be alone?" she asked. Zach looked at her, steam rising faintly from the fresh kill between them. No, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "I used to think I was." He leaned against the post. "What changed?" "Nothing yet," she said. "But the quiet here feels different. Doesn't root down the same." Inside, the smell of roasting meat filled the cabin. Bryony carved thin strips for drying on the rack Zach had built the previous spring. Her hands moved with purpose, but her shoulders had lost some of their tension. He sat nearby, sharpening the blade edge with a whetstone. The soft scrape filled the space between them. "You have people?" he asked. "Back east. A brother in Illinois. We parted hard." "Why?" "He sold my inheritance behind my back. Said I didn't need land. That I'd marry soon and have a man to see to things." Zach met her eyes. "What did you do?" "Took the last of my mother's jewelry, sold it and came west." He nodded, slowly. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," she said. "But I'd rather build something from scratch than live under someone else's roof." Zach set the blade aside. "I understand that." She turned the meat, letting the fat drip onto the coals. "You talk more now." He looked into the fire. "You make it easy." She didn't smile, but something shifted in her expression. A softening, like thaw beneath crusted ice. That night she didn't climb to the loft. She sat near the hearth after the lamps were snuffed, legs drawn beneath her, eyes on the flames. Zach sat across from her, knees nearly touching. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and you won't be here," he said. Bryony didn't look away. "I keep thinking the same." He reached across the space between them, slow and sure. She met him halfway. Their fingers tangled, and neither spoke. Outside, the wind had gone still. Inside, something steady began to grow. The days pressed longer now. Not warmer winter still held its grip, but the sun lingered a little past the tops of the trees, casting a deeper gold over the snow-slicked hills. Inside the cabin, the air had changed too, though not from the fire. Bryony was kneeling by the door, oiling the hinges with rendered fat from the deer. She moved with care, her sleeves rolled, a hairpin clenched between her teeth as she worked. Zach watched from the table, mending a cracked stirrup with a length of rawhide, his fingers sure. "You ever think about what you'd do different?" she asked, without looking up. He twisted the strap tight before answering. "Some things, maybe, but not the way I loved her." Bryony nodded. "That's not what I meant." He set the leather down. "Then what?" "I mean now, not back then." She sat up, rubbing her palms on a scrap of cloth. "What you'd do next if life gave you the choice." Zach leaned back in the chair. "Might build a new barn, one with a stone foundation. Maybe fence the north pasture better. That snow cuts through like a blade." She stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. "That's a start. But I meant beyond chores." He studied her a long moment. "You always think in futures?" "I have to. It's the only thing that doesn't feel taken from me." Zach rose, crossed to the hearth, and stirred the coals. Sparks flared. "Never knew how to want something until I had it. And by then, it was already part of me." Bryony came closer, the corner of her shawl brushing his sleeve. "You still don't know what to want?" "I think I do," he said. "I just don't know how to ask for it." She didn't move away. "Try." He looked up at her. "Stay." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It settled gentle, like ash after a long fire. Bryony's eyes didn't drop. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. They stood like that until the wind outside shifted, carrying the faint creak of ice splitting on the creek. Bryony stepped toward the stove, pulled the kettle off the hook, and poured water into 2 tin cups. I found a sewing needle in my pack, she said. Could mend that tear in your coat. It's not much of a coat anymore. Still keeps the wind off. He took the cup from her, fingers brushing hers. Like you. She didn't smile, but her chest rose slow, deep. We'll need to gather more saplings once the thaw starts, she said. For fencing. Maybe build a second shed. We? He asked. Bryony looked at him full. If you'll have it. Zach took a breath, felt the ache in his ribs ease for the first time in weeks. I want more than a shed with you. Her voice stayed quiet. What else? Everything that comes after. Bryony didn't answer right away. She reached out and touched the base of his throat. Her fingers warm despite the cold. Then we'll find out what that looks like. That night, they lay beside each other on the floor pallet, the loft left empty. He didn't reach for her in hunger. He simply curled his body around hers, her back to his chest, her hand resting lightly over his. No words passed between them, only breath and the steady beat of two people no longer waiting. Outside, the trees crackled under frost. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. By the time the last thaw came, the creek behind the cabin had risen enough to carry shards of broken ice past the banks, slow and glassy. The snow was gone from the pasture, leaving behind winter-matted grass and a stretch of earth soft underfoot. Zach stood at the edge of the field, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder, a fence post in his hand. He turned when he heard Bryony's steps behind him. She carried a bundle of rough-cut stakes and a hand-forged hammer, her sleeves pushed up, the skin of her arms freckled from the first real sun they'd seen in months. You plan on digging all those holes with your boot heel? She asked. I was waiting for someone to tell me where they ought to go, he said. She set the stakes down and pointed toward the north slope. There. Water runs off slower on that side. Grass'll hold better. He nodded and set to work. She knelt beside him, steadying the post while he drove the first stake into the ground. The rhythm between them had become second nature, shared glances, one finishing what the other had begun without asking. They worked until the sun leaned westward, the new fence stretching in a clean line behind them. As they walked back to the cabin, Bryony rubbed her shoulder. I'll need to head out soon. Missoula's near a day's ride. I have to file the papers on my land before the month turns. Zach's jaw tightened. I know. I'll be back in 5 days, maybe 6 if weather turns. He didn't speak, not until they reached the porch. You sure you want to come back? Bryony took a step closer, the last of the sunlight catching the edge of her cheekbone. You think I would have stayed through deep snow and empty shelves just to leave now? I just want to hear you say it. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, edges softened with handling. I wrote the claim over to both of us. If you'll sign it, the land's ours. Not just mine. His throat worked around the words. You didn't have to. I know. But I want to. He took the paper, eyes scanning the ink. Then he looked up. Then you'll stay? I already have, she said. They shared the meal in silence that night, a pot of wild greens and the last of the dried rabbit. Afterward, Zach cleared the table and Bryony sat near the window, weaving a loop of horsehair into a rope halter. The lamplight caught the curve of her neck, the movement of her fingers. He leaned against the doorway, watching her. I've been thinking, he said, voice low. We built this place to last through a winter. Maybe it's time we built it for something more. She didn't stop weaving. What do you mean? I want to marry you, Bryony. She looked up, eyes steady. Not just because we've been here together. No, because I know the way you move through the world. Because you never asked me to forget what I lost. And because with you here, this place feels like it has breath in it again. She set the rope aside and stood. All right then. He blinked. All right? You asked plain. I'm answering plane. He stepped forward, drawing her into his arms. She fit there like she'd always belonged. We'll speak to the circuit rider next time he comes through. I already figured we would, she said against his chest. They spent the next weeks preparing. Zach rode into Stevensville and returned with flour, a bolt of muslin, and a tin of coffee. Bryony hemmed herself a dress from the muslin, simple and cream-colored. She braided her hair with a strip of blue calico she'd kept for years, and when the preacher arrived on his rounds, they stood on the porch and said their vows with the pine trees as witnesses. The horses wore fresh combs in their manes. The cabin was swept clean. They shared cornbread, dried berries, and laughter. Later that night, after the preacher had gone and the sun had slipped behind the ridge, Zach carried her over the threshold, not for tradition, but because he wanted to. Her smile was quiet, her hand curved at the back of his neck. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. He set her down gently, and she leaned into him, resting her forehead against his. I didn't think I'd ever feel like this again, he whispered. Bryony traced the edge of his jaw. You didn't have to stop loving her to love me. I know, he said, but I didn't know it could feel this alive. They lay down together, the warmth of the hearth wrapping around them. Outside, spring crept into the soil. Inside, they breathed in rhythm, two hearts no longer braced against the cold. Years passed in the way they do when time is marked by chores and seasons. They planted a small orchard apple and plum and strung a line of biskeps along the southern slope. Bryony kept a table of herbs and cuttings near the window, where the sun fell long in the afternoon. Zach built a second barn, just as he once said he might, and put a bell on the roof so Bryony could call him in when supper was ready. They never spoke of what came before in sorrow, only in quiet gratitude for the path that had led them here. Each evening, they sat by the fire, hands sometimes clasped, sometimes working, always near. The cabin that once held silence now held life full and warm and stubbornly enduring. They grew old in the mountains side by side, and were never alone again.